Thank you. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to my fellow panelists and the participants. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the session on digital transformation of pharma supply chain, lessons learned from pandemic. I'm sure since morning you have had great experience of listening to speakers from different companies about what it has taken us to respond to pandemic. And today, at the end of this session, we have a great set of panel who talk about one of the most important elements of end-to-end supply chain. Before we start this panel, I just want to make a few comments about what we have all gone through. That if you reflect on the last 12 plus months, companies across the sectors have been confronted with what may potentially be the largest health and economic crisis in the recent history. The companies were forced into extraordinary measures to protect their people and maintain operations at the same time. While some contended with keeping the operations running in the face of shortages of workers and or raw materials, others have tried to keep up with sudden spike in demand. It is with that background, if I may invite the panelists here to share what has been the biggest changes in the last 12 to 15 months for supply chain, what has surprised them the most, and in response to these changes, what have you done and what are you most proud of? I will request each of the panelists, starting with Prasad, followed by Swapan, Vikram, Saurabh, and Anand in that order, to share their views. And I would request you to please use 2 to 3 minutes to provide your comments. Thank you. Prasad, over to you.
Thank you, Jaydev. Good evening. I know we are on the tight schedule of the time, so I'll use the brevity as the topic. Everybody knows about the pandemic has hit all the organization or humanity, I would say, across the continents. But I would not go into the same thing as what was the crisis or what is the China into it. But what I would just bring out one key area from our perspective would be Biocon, as known as the industry stalwart of biotechnology and fermentation-based API. So we were hit from the both sides. We were hit from the China perspective as being in the API industry. And second, which I would like to highlight is in the second wave, as you all know, oxygen was in the dire need across all the hospitals and for the mankind. And guess what? What we need the most in our fermentation? It is a daily oxygen. Thank you, Jaydev. So as we were discussing, what hit us the most? So from the last years, I would say we were semi-ready because it all started in China when there were environmental issues. So we were getting ready for all this disruption in supply chain in 17, 18. So we were not as hit by pandemic in 20 as we were hit by pandemic in 21. But the very proud of our team and also the company. At times we sacrificed our product because there was a humanitarian need. So we of course put the society first before the oxygen for our production. But on the other hand, the way we managed across the whole supply chain with the steel industry, because oxygen comes from steel industry, and we were in daily touch with all the way to the Prime Minister's office, managing with the steel industry, managing with the hospital needs in Bangalore, and at the same time taking care of the business needs, because producing the medicine itself also was helping the humanity in another way. So so it was a really moment of pride for all. But what hit us was all preparation went haywire, and we never expected it would hit us at the oxygen level. So again, my 2 minutes are up. Jaydev, back to you. So everybody has a chance to share their experiences. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Prasad. I think your idea about being prepared, yet there were significant challenges as you maintained a balance between producing medicines which are for the greater good of humanity, at the same time providing oxygen to the hospital. So clearly an important balance to strike. Swapan, if I may turn it over to you, your most I would say, interesting challenge and your most proud moment on how you managed it?
Thanks, Jaydev, and good to see you. Hi, everybody, and good afternoon to the audience. So I think what hit us was uncertainty, and I think it was all over, right? It was right from the demand, from the supplies of materials, to the production uncertainty in our plants, and also uncertainty about the lives, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about people, right? And we were in a situation where everybody was a bit scared. People were not sure that how they will go out to the factories and to the labs. So if I want to, sum it up, Jaydev and team, in one word, I think it was uncertainty. And great extent, because every day things were evolving. And all across supply chain, right from, as I said, from the demand management to the supply planning, to production planning, to the distribution management, right, and the people element. I think what I'm proud about, and I want to sum it up as caring for life, what supply stands for, but I think it is true for the entire pharma industry. And how people stood to the challenge. I think 3 or 4 themes I would like to highlight. One is the entire human spirit. And in spite of so many challenges on the personal side, how people kept going to the factories and how people kept going to the labs and kept producing the medicines. And I think I'll put this at the top, the human spirit for caring for life. I think the second thing, Jaydev, which I'm proud about, is the entire innovation and the digitization which the companies adopted. And I think, there's something which cannot be done in a day. So some of the companies were ready. For example, we were ready because we have been investing in the technology and digitization for last 3-4 years. But those tools allowed us to really, adapt to these challenges and the uncertainty to bring the velocity in the entire supply chain. And just to give an example, the SNOP cycle, which we used to typically run once in a month, we actually went to a weekly cycle because there were so many changes happening, and that helped us on the back of the IBP backbone, which we had implemented over the last 2 years prior to COVID hit us, in terms of really managing these things end to end in a manner where we can, take care of the uncertainty and the moving pieces on the demand and supply. And last but not the least is, I want to highlight as third thing which I am proud about is the entire collaboration. And collaboration not only within the organization, which went to a different level, but also collaboration across the supply chain, whether it is your suppliers and partners, whether it is the distribution chain, and how everybody came together in terms of taking care of this challenge. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Swapan. I think it's indeed uncertainty across the supply chain is a big theme, and then some of the things that you talked about, being proud of, being human spirit, innovation, readiness from a digitization, automation perspective, and the wonderful collaboration that we saw end to end. So thank you so much for sharing that. Vikram, if I may turn to you and hear your thoughts and comments about biggest changes, what surprised you the most, and at the same time, what did you do and what are you most proud of?
Sure. Thanks, Jaydev, and thank you, ET, for bringing us on this platform. A very warm good afternoon to all the listeners and audience. So to start with, the last 12-15 months, yes, it has been unprecedented in supply chain parlance. If we have to talk about a black swan event, totally rarest of the rarest. It what really surprised us being in the pharma industry was the disruption that we saw both at upstream and downstream. So both the demand and supply simultaneously got disrupted, and the way we are interlinked in our supply chains, how global they are with respect to procuring a material, and India being the pharmacy to the world, we have to ship our finished goods across the world. So the disruption that we saw end to end was very unprecedented, and it surprised us. And what we did in response to that was a lot of innovation, try to really quickly look at innovative solutions with respect to how we can manage our capacities, how we can quickly validate, alternate material sources. And this was all supported very well from the regulatory and the government bodies also. So, and the one thing, quickly to talk about that, we are really proud about, what I think we really, took a good handle on was we shifted our focus from business process re-engineering, looking at how we can innovate, to business continuity plans. So we were looking at plan A, plan B, how we can look at scenario planning, so that we know if we see a disruption in one part of the world with respect to material availability, how quickly we can look at a plan B and look at localized vendors or sources, how quickly we can validate. We all know we are in a very heavily regulated industry, and that was the need of the hour, uh, as to how quickly we can turn around and look at not having a disruption in supplies of the critical life-saving medicines. In the middle of last year, multiple medicines were being taken for COVID. I mean, we did not know where we are sensing the demand, which medicine is going to be catered. HCQS was a miracle drug sometime middle of the last year. So all those uncertainties, definitely I'll take a cue from Mr. Sapan, what he said about uncertainty, and we looked at scenarios, how we can build across to ensure we are able to meet customer needs on critical medicines. Over to you, Jaidev.
Thank you so much, Vikram. I think the way you framed it, which is both demand and supply disruption at the same time, really articulates the essence of this pandemic. And also, thank you for sharing that, the focus on BCP, Plan A, Plan B, the business continuity planning, including localization. You also raised an important theme, Vikram, which is being pharmacy of the world. And I think towards the end of the session today, or maybe a little later in the session, we will explore what is it that we can do more of to continue to strengthen our focus area and our place in being pharmacy to the world. So that's something that we will come back to a little later. Saurabh, if I may turn to you and hear your thoughts about your surprises and what have you done that you are most proud of?
Yeah. Hi, Jaidev. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting us. No, I just put it slightly generic to start with. You know what? Prior to COVID, the pharma supply chain, if you really see, wasn't really exposed to the non-pharma world. Yeah. I don't think many of us were talking about it as vehemently as we are doing today. Drugs were produced, got to their final destination, and were, of course, reaching to the patients. But actually, COVID exposed the drug supply chain to the entire world, I would say. When the pandemic struck, world came to the standstill, right, for a while. Plant operations were impacted. Cross-country supplies were halted, literally. Input materials, of course, ran into shortages. We spoke about it just a while back. Transportations were challenged. But I think to me, it was the local challenges and our unpreparedness possibly. And I think one of us spoke about the uncertainty as well, which really gave me a surprise, I would say. But you know what, I think the way whole team, reorganized themselves in terms of looking at the realistic lead times, working on the inventory, looking at the demand and supply plans, the concurrent way of planning, I think that was a very big, healthy surprise in terms of, I would say. We reorganized ourselves rather quickly and, much earlier than what we thought of ourselves. I think that was a very good surprise. In fact, the thing which I'm really, really proud of, I think many of us spoke about is how the people responded to these challenges. We have seen the biggest impact on our workforce. Yeah, people, of course, continue to report in the plants, work in the production lines, and how I think as an organization, many of us quickly rose to challenges in terms of getting everybody safe in the workforce. I think that was very, very key, and the spirit of people and how we bounced back was absolutely proud of. So I think, of course, we talked about uncertainty, but I guess this is going to be the mantra in future as well. And I think we have to really learn from these experiences and really prepare ourselves in future as well.
Thank you, Saurabh. I fully agree with you that we have to learn from the experiences that we have had. whether it was about, doing concurrent way of doing things, or whether about, collaborating, the people response. So there are lots of good learnings that we have had, and we shouldn't consign them to the fact that now, okay, now, we are in a slightly better position, so now let's forget about all the new things that we have learned, right? Finally, Anand, I know it's not easy to comment at the end and then talk about, what have been the challenges. Many of them must have been spoken about. But I would love to hear about what has been your surprise, and what are you most proud of as a part of the senior supply chain professionals.
Thanks, Jaydev, and a very good afternoon to everyone. Most of the challenges have been spoken about. So the things which were discussed many a times pre-COVID just got reinforced during the COVID times. For an example, when we talk about the sourcing part of it, we've been talking about cross-border dependencies, and that has been now come into the play during the COVID, where we wanted really a localization or a backward integration. Now, there's something which we've been talking about. Now, the sense of urgency has been imposed upon. You look at the choice of partners with whom the companies deal with. Typically, the procurement professional always goes for the lowest cost, then a sustainable supplies. Now, the pandemic has again woken up that, guys, are we really having the right set of partners across the globe who will withstand with you come what may, because the prioritization will play an important role. And hence, whether your strategy is intertwined with the company's portfolio strategy, are you de-risking yourself to that extent? You look at from the R&D perspective, we've been always talking about how can we reduce the development cycle, and look at in the pandemic, you could turn around every product development to launch in 3 to 4 months time. Right? You can see remdesivir coming in, favipiravir coming in. You look at a lot of drugs which were able to churn around 2DC and all. It was just a matter of 3 to 4 months where the clinical studies have been done. DCA has been given or awarded the license. In no time, you are able to market those products. Look at the planning, stop and talk about it. Previously, we used to have 1 month fix and 3 months rolling plan. Now we start talking about a weekly basis. So your planning cycles got shortened. Your frequency of your planning run has become more often. So in the months where you used to run MRP once or twice, now you're running 4 times in a week. If you look at the distribution part of it, there is an emergence of e-pharmacies, modern retail channels, and a next generation distributors who started coming in, which actually have started providing door delivery services while ordering all the medicines online. So you see a big changes. And what we have been very fortunate about that in all of these, we played a very, very important role in each of these legs of supply chain. And the resultant of that was an unobstructed supply chain or a product services to our patients. And that is what we are proud about. The most important thing for all of us is also that government has provided all the required support in the times when we seek for, whether it is a API registration for a new vendor in a country, you just have to file an application and the DCI would give the approval for it. Whether you give a document for a new drug approval, you would get the approval. New site validation, new site for remdesivir, favipiravir, any of the products, you would get the approval in no time. So I think we are a proud employee, we are a proud employer, we are a proud citizen of this country. This definitely will go a long way. I probably wish that we continue the same rigor in all of these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. And yes, absolutely. As you said, we should continue the same rigor and continue to bring a number of new medicines in a shortest possible time and in a very unobstructed manner. So thank you for sharing that, Anand. As we move on, there are 2 very important topics that all of you have raised. One was around, many of you talked about, but Swapan, you, Vikram, Saurabh, Anand, all of you talked about was about digitization, automation, analytics, etc. And the second one, Vikram, you raised it, but Prasad, you also talked about it, was around being pharmacy of the world. Maybe let's use the next few minutes to explore these 2 topics in that order. So one of the things, if I reflect on some of the work we have done at McKinsey since 2017, is that we've been tracking the progress of Industry 4.0 through our annual survey of the global manufacturing companies. And what we found was that 94% of these respondents said that the Industry 4.0 has helped them keep their operations running during the crisis, something that you are also reflecting on. And 56% of them said that technologies has been critical in their response. Not surprisingly, 2/3 of them said that they were now more optimistic about the prospect of digital technologies as compared to a year ago. Now, this has pandemic, the challenge of the pandemic has actually improved acceptance of the digital technologies as compared to what was before that. But there was one other interesting takeaway, and I just want to share that before I come to the question, which is that pandemic also forced the companies to reevaluate the progress of their own organization's maturity on digital journey. They forced them to evaluate how well we were progressing. And the number of people who said that they had scaled these digital technologies was actually down by 40%. This could be because they were now much more conscious of what is needed or what was required to scale up. In that context, if I may, start by asking you, Swapan, and then go to Anand this time, you early on, so that you don't have to come at the end, and then Saurabh in that order, on how are you thinking about digital analytics and automation? And what are the challenges that you foresee as organizations lead these discussions? Any advice for the audience as you go through this? So how are you thinking about it? Challenges and any advice, right? With Swapan, Anand, and Saurabh. And then I'll come to the second question around how can we strengthen our role in the pharmacy of the world supply chain to Vikram and Prasad. Over to you, Swapan.
Okay, thanks, Jaidev. So, how I think about it is very simple. I think this is something which is a must, and I think all the companies have to invest in it, and they have to invest early, because there are 2 or 3 big advantages, right? So one is it helps us taking decisions faster and early, right? And I'll give you some example in the things where we have invested in Cipla in the last 3-4 years. So we started this digitization journey almost 4.5 years back, and obviously we started with the basics, right? With the MRP, because in our overall journey in Cipla, we sort of decided to embark on that 4-5 years back, right? But then we quickly moved to the newer things. We went for IBP very quickly. We started investing in the blockchain solutions around a year back. Around 2.5 years back, within Cipla, we set up an analytics cell within supply chain, and we started experimenting with the AI-based models in terms of how can I predict the demand better, or how can I predict the things which allows me to take care of the supply in a manner so that there's no sales loss and the inventories are managed in a better way. So my experience with this has been extremely good, and there are 2 or 3 things. One is it helps people on the ground, and I will start with that, right? Without these automation tools and digitization, the kind of burden which the teams have in a complex supply chain, in a complex environment where you are dealing with thousands of SKUs and tens of plants, I think it's quite burdensome on that. And I think that I would like to highlight as the first thing, the impact it has on the people in terms of making their lives better and enabling better decision making for them, right? So that is one. Secondly, obviously it helps you taking better decisions proactively, and third, it helps you in terms of bringing the agility in the system, because when you have advanced tools, you can run the system again and again. You can look at the data, you can take the decisions faster, you can take them proactively ahead in time. So overall, I think managing complexity, taking proactive decisions, and making people's life better and enabling them, I think this is what I would say is the key. I think the challenge area in my thinking has been more about the mindset. And we always talk about the industry and the comparison of different industries. But if you compare pharma with a couple of other industries, I think some industries have been much more proactive in investing in these tools, right? And we can talk about FMCG, we can talk about some of the other industries. But I've seen largely the leadership thinking in pharma in the Indian domain has changed significantly. And I'm not talking only about Cipla, I'm talking about all the colleagues sitting here. Because obviously, we have this good connect with 5-6 top companies, and we know what everybody is doing, right? Because the employees keep moving from one to other, etc. So I think the biggest challenge was the mindset, and I think that challenge is gone now, right? So now I think my advice to people will be that invest early in digitization, and try to do as fast as you can. Just one caution: see, we should not pick up a theme just for the sake of the theme, because it is a buzzword, right? I think when you're picking a theme, for example, blockchain is talked about a lot, and what kind of use cases you can do in pharma. You have to pick something which really brings value for you, your organization, shareholders, and the patients at that. And that's the only caution, I would put.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting way of putting in. Don't chase for the sake of it. Don't chase because it's a buzzword. Focus on what value it can deliver to the patients, both from supply, quality, and affordability perspective. Right. So focus on that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sopin. Anand, if I may go over to you now and talk about your experience, any challenges, and any advice.
So, Jaidev, Dr. Reddy's has been also focusing on an innovation hub for quite a while, and we always wanted to be pioneer in the tools, in the systems that we adopt. And our journey started off on the SAP on 2004, and what we have done off lately is, as Sopin said, we also migrated into IBP. And currently we are looking at Kinaxis as a platform which helps us from end-to-end visibility, providing a view to the entire organization, not just on the demand part of it, not just on the supply part of, but from a business delivery perspective, which often gets not noted while you run a business, because you try to do a local optimum and try to see only the part of business which you are keen to. Now, this brings a complete visibility, and hence your decision-making process becomes much faster from either the CapEx part of it or from a prioritization part of it, or if in case you want to look at even outsourcing a part of the business, which doesn't make sense at this point in time. We have also seen our journey in the last 12 months where people have adopted that as a way of working. For an example, eBPR or eBMR is one of the tools which got maximally utilized at the plant level. If you look at typically plant, 60% of the people who are deployed off plant are touching the product. Remaining 40% of manpower are the allied services, which means they don't need to come to the plant to do their services. They can sit at home, and that was completely utilized through eBMR, eBPR software of SAP, which helped of great flexibility to be more productive. At the same time, your product doesn't get disturbed. Another classic example of IoT that we have implemented in maintenance was, instead of time-based maintenance, now let's talk about condition-based maintenance. Now, what it says is that you don't need to go around each and every asset and see how today is the 5th day of every month and I'm supposed to clean it. Rather, I would get a sense from that machine that how good or bad the machine is running. These are a few of the examples. Again, we went into another thing where all these CFAs and some of the distributors, we could do a geofencing, which essentially means we don't need to track anymore any consignment that we dispatch from any of our hubs. We get an auto alert. Now that takes away a lot of bandwidth out of the system. Now, these are certain interventions which help the productivity of the entire organization. At the same time, they also help them to drive and focus more on the business than data collection, and then finally on the decision making. From the challenges, as everybody goes through, it's a new thing for everyone. When you have a certain way of working and suddenly you got exposed to a new way of working, you have a doubts on the data integrity, you would have a doubts on how many people would have an access to the same data, and there would be certain pulls and push which will come through. What we have seen a bit of challenge is also the momentum that was initially built during the first wave. Because when you go and see the first wave coming down, and between there is a lull period of 2 to 3 months, is where people start thinking about, is it going to sustain? A classic example I'll give you is e-detailing platform for a sales executive. Now, what happens is a phygital world. In the phygital world, a sales representative has to go to the doctor and detail it out. Now, given that in the month of January, February, your doctors have started practicing and you have an opportunity to go, you stop using the e-detailing platform and suddenly your physical interactions have started going up. Now, again, coming back to second wave, again, you would able to leverage it. But just from the leverage perspective, you could have leveraged the same platform for forever. So I see that continuing the momentum of what you have leveraged in the past should be there. I think that's the only piece of advice and maybe the challenge.
Thank you, Anand. I know we can talk about it at length, and perhaps someday we will have a longer session. But Saurabh, if I may turn to you and get your experiences, any challenges, and any advice.
Sure. The first thing I must tell you, Jaidev, and again coming from experience, see, having come from a consumer goods industry, and for me it's been about a year, just about a year in pharma, I can tell you pharma supply chain handles incredible amount of data, right from sourcing to manufacturing to storing, transportation. It's a mammoth of information which is available. Capturing this information and converting that into an actionable insight is something which is really, really important. And I think this last 2 years, all of us have learned that. Possibly, the pharma supply chain is rather, they have not been able to really take the benefit of digitalization, while the other industries have been slightly ahead in this journey. But I think it is important and it is really good to see that everybody is really talking about it with a sense of purpose and urgency. Yeah, and I give an example. Many of our companies, of the Indian pharmaceutical companies, are in a generic market. Yeah, and it's important for us to really capture an opportunity which is there in market, which possibly we would have not planned or we would have not seen a demand of it. Now, how do we really go back and forth in an entire value chain and see how quickly we can respond is something which is extremely, extremely critical. And I talked about the information, but I think today the information and the way it is being evaluated is evaluated in blocks. I think it's time now for us to really look at some of those platforms which help us do a concurrent planning from an end-to-end visibility to really do so. While I say that, it's also important, if I am just now running over to challenges, it's also important to understand what we need. It's not something, a digital solution, right? I think Anand and Lupin spoke about it. It's not something which you can plug and play, right? You have to understand what you need, yeah? And you have to really look at it from the requirement perspective, and it's a journey. So you have to start with having a right strategic intent, have the stakeholder buying, and then get into the execution. Yeah, and of course you have to really get into a slightly detail. I think one thing which I must say is important is communication. You cannot have a change management without having it sufficiently or adequately communicated to people, especially the frontline performers. Yeah, so I think that's, to me, is really critical. Like I think our colleagues mentioned, I think Lupin is also in the journey of digital transformation, and we are of course taking cues of all of those and making sure that for us it's also a success as well.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. Indeed, communication, change management is essential for mindset shift, as Sopan you were alluding to earlier. Final question for today, and something that we started discussing earlier. India is the pharmacy of the world. India is already a big part of global pharma supply chain. What more could we do as industry, as company, and what could other stakeholders do? So maybe Prasad, I'll begin with you, and then Vikram, you will have the last word. So over to you, Prasad, and then Vikram.
Thank you, Jaydev. It was a very interesting conversation listening to all of them. So coming back, I would put in two facets from my perspective. One is, as you rightly said, we are pharmacy of the world. However, over the period, as we had more and more formulation expertise in the industry, API somehow in last 20, 30 years was shifted. There was that geographical shift to China. And where we are today is either the key starting material of API or the API. India, although the pharmacy has been 60 to 70% huge dependency on the API. So what can we do as an industry? So I would again start, we have already started doing something. There had been a great initiative in the PLI scheme from the government, but what has been done is not enough from the both sides, as the industry or as the governance structures. We need to bring that back, what we have outsourced. So that is one from the API perspective. I know I'm looking at the time also, Jaydev, so I will be very short. And the second, I just want to bring in the topic. We've been always this, in a layman's term, a tablet or capsule, the country of the world. We call it pharmacy. But to me, that is many times is an old school. What we also need to do is, I would like to say what Biocon has been forayed into is the biotechnology. We've been the pioneers of the biosimilars. In fact, the trastuzumab, I'll just take 30 seconds on that, was the first monoclonal antibody. Trastuzumab was approved across the world. And the great feather in the cap for India was the FDA's ODAC committee of all 14 great oncologists voted it as 14-0. So, and that could not have been possible without the bedrock foundation of the technology, whether it was in R&D, whether it was in manufacturing and so forth. So I'll not go into that. But I think as an industry, we need to cultivate that, because we always has been the cheaper drug manufacturers, whereas Biocon broke that trend and we wanted to be in the innovative biosimilars. So I think the time has come where we need to do more from the upstream, like API strengthening in the country, and also foraying into not always having, oh, we make the copy of the drugs at the cheaper cost, but to invent into the technology and be at the forefront of the pharmaceutical world into the new area. Over back to you, Jaydev.
Thank you so much, Prasad. Do more upstream and be more innovative. Cost is good. We are something that we already we are doing. Vikram, over to you, and final words from you.
Thank you. I mean, really captivating thoughts from all the co-panel members. I'm really happy to hear some thoughts. And I think, Prasad sir, you read my mind with respect to two things that he pointed out. I think those are core to pharma right now, generic pharma space, India specific. We are talking about how we can de-risk specifically from China, because our dependency, like Prasad sir was mentioning, in the mid 90s, where we were procuring about 30-35% of the actives and key starting material from China. Today, that number has ballooned to about 65-70%. So that's a huge dependency on one particular geography. But it has not happened overnight, and we cannot reverse this also overnight. It's going to be a long, sustained effort. PLIs, like Mr. Prasad was mentioning, are good, but they have to be in a very structured, uniform, policies. They cannot be swinging when the government changes in India. It has to be a long drawn policy where, the investments that manufacturers or the business is doing, they know that it will not be overturned by some other, government that comes through. So that becomes very important. And it will be a long drawn process, about 5 to 7 years to 10 years is minimum that I'm looking at, because again, we are so heavily regulated to develop the product, to develop the technology, to have economic of scales, and then to, validate and, get the product, up and running. So that is number one. Number two, again, taking cue from what Mr. Prasad was talking about is, I like to talk about the 4 Ds in pharma. The first 2 Ds are the discovery and design phase, and the last 2 are develop and deliver. So we've currently championed the development and delivery. We are in the generic space. We are doing excellent over there. But we need to get into R&D innovation. We need to get into the discovery and design phase where we start looking at innovative drugs, more complex drugs, biosimilars, biologics is the way forward for Indian pharma. I think so. So, again, putting some numbers to, the by value, by volume, probably we are, sending about 30% of the drugs across the globe. But by value, we are only contributing about, about 3 to 4%. That's it, we are only about exporting about what 50-60 billion, including the domestic market, which is nothing when you compare to a 1.3-1.4 trillion dollar industry. So we need to up the ante on the value as well and look at the volume, which we are already there. So that's my take, Jaidev. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vikram. Isha is here, perhaps to remind us that we are over time. But before I go, I just want to just close this session by thanking all the panelists for the great insights, especially around human spirit, continuing to work with human spirit. We have innovated, but the message from this panel is let's innovate more, especially around product going forward. So with that, Isha, over to you, and thank you so much for inviting us.